Welcome to The Spotlight, the podcast where veterans and military spouses connect and share how their military experience has transformed their lives and their businesses. Here's your host, Bob Louthen.
Hey, this is your host, Bob Louthen, founder of the VeteranCrowd Network, the network that brings veterans and veteran-led businesses together with each other and the resources they need to prosper. And you are tuning into The Spotlight. Hey everyone, Bob Louthen with the VeteranCrowd Network. The spotlight today shining on Laura Renner, the founder and president of Freedom Makers. She is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, an Air Force veteran, and has created a very unique company in Freedom Makers. Laura, thank you for stepping into the spotlight.
Happy to. Thanks for having me.
So before we jump into Freedom Makers and the discussion of that, take me back and tell me about where you grew up and how did you wind up applying to and going to the United States Air Force Academy?
Sure. So my dad was Army. He was field artillery, and I grew up mostly in Germany and Oklahoma at the lovely Fort Sill, and was born in Fort Ord, so just moved all over as a traditional Army brat. And my parents had split, but he happened to be visiting when I got a postcard from the Air Force Academy. And he was the one who talked me into it. And so, and military was all I knew. So I went for it, and that's how I ended up there.
You mentioned in the in the lightning round that you really drank the Air Force Kool-Aid. You must have found a home there. Did you love it?
I didn't while I was there. But as I've gotten older and gotten away from it, I've certainly come to truly appreciate the experiences I had there and what it created for me in my life. And so they always said that while you were there, and it was just hard to believe, but I certainly do feel that way now.
Everybody has sort of that love-hate relationship with the military school,
Yeah.
There were some dark moments
Right.
in the first year in particular. I found the sophomore year to be even more terrible because the academics kicked in and you were just nobody, nobody even cared. That seemed like.
Yeah. I remember too, like people have said, oh, I bet once you got past your freshman year, it was fine. And I'm like, actually, I think freshman year was in a way kind of the easiest year. It was a long haul road, right? And that made it difficult. Although I will say, because yours was private school, right?
Well, state, yeah. It's
Okay.
not the academy route. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, for us, that's how we made ourselves feel better. We were like, well, at least we're not paying to be treated like this.
Yeah, I'm a glutton for punishment. I was writing tuition checks for that kind of treatment. What kind of an idiot? We know who the smart person is on this phone call and who the dumb one is, right? Hey, so what did you do when you got out? You commissioned? What was your job in the Air Force?
I ended up doing public affairs, starting in there, and then I actually went back into the reserve and switched to personnel.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Personnel, that's a good setup for what you're doing today. Yeah. You had a couple of career stops before Freedom Makers. Talk a little bit about that. And you went back to the Navy postgraduate school. Can you say I'm stepping into the spotlight in Mandarin?
I don't know if I remember the word for spotlight.
Okay.
But it'd be like, oh, and then now all the Mandarin speakers are going to judge me, but it might be something like, it'd be like, I think stepping into would be something like onsite jinbu, and then whatever spotlight is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know who I'm going to get to order food for me when we go somewhere to eat. But let's talk about Freedom Makers. This is a very unique company that you've built. How did you come up with this idea? What happened? What was the spark for this?
So I think, after I got out, I went to business school and I went for the purpose of starting a business, and I ended up starting 2 businesses prior to Freedom Makers. Neither one of them took. But in between those 2, I worked for my old wing commander at a corporate job in HR, and I managed the recruiting team there. And I just realized, like I said, it starts with the people. If you're taking care of your people, they'll take care of the mission, right? And so then when I left that corporate job, my second business was doing recruiting for small businesses. And I just found that a lot of business owners, they weren't ready to hire. They weren't ready to commit to that responsibility of an employee, especially out here in California. One, if your revenue is not stable, or if you're just not sure if you have enough work for someone, could you afford their payroll, things like that. But they still needed help. They just weren't ready to commit to having an employee. Meanwhile, my brother is active duty and stayed active duty that whole time, and he was getting ready to PCS. And I was talking to my sister-in-law, and it was like, we've had this conversation multiple times. Every time they're going to PCS, what are you doing? What's your plan for work at your next duty station, or where you're going next? And it was around that time that I was thinking about the plight of the small business owner, where they need help, but they're not ready to hire me. And then I'm having this conversation with my sister-in-law about what she was going to do for work at their next duty station. And that's when I just kind of put two and two together and launched Freedom Makers from there.
So my numbers may be wrong, but there's something like 800,000 military spouses on active duty at any given time, maybe something like that.
The last number I saw was 500,000, but that was a few years ago. So it might be 800. Mm-hmm.
We were within spitting distance, okay. But the plight of the military spouses, their spouse is reassigned to another spot, and they had a job and now they're moving,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of really handicaps military spouses. Or the unemployment numbers are higher, right?
Right. It's something like 30% unemployment. And then you add underemployment on top of that. And it's pretty astounding.
So by underemployment, they can't really get a job in their chosen profession because they've moved so much. Sort of does terrible damage to your resume. You sort of appear to be a job jumper, don't you?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So, we've had discussions with us on so you sort of put together, you had these businesses that had a need, you had this pool of talent that was underemployed. How did it start? What was the first thing you did?
Great question. So that was the beauty of this being my third business, in that I knew what was most important and I knew to focus on that first. And so I just went out and started selling. And when I got the first client, I went on to a network I was a part of and posted, "Hey, this is my vision. If you're interested, let me know." And I think I had maybe 5 spouses join me right then and there. And that first one who worked for that first client is now our operations manager. And so it's pretty neat to have come that journey. But yeah, so that's what I did was
How
I had
long ago was this? When did this happen?
it was 2015.
2015.
Mhm.
And had the concept of the gig economy and remote working, it was still pretty new at that point, so to speak.
It was, however, I'm in the Bay Area, so it was already taking off a little bit faster here than the rest of the country, I assume. And so people were pretty aware of it. There was more familiarity with it in the Bay Area than outside. Even like if I would go out to the suburbs and I would say, "Yeah, I have a virtual assistant company," and people be like, "What's a virtual assistant?" And I didn't know how to explain that at the time. And
Hmm.
so, but San Francisco, Oakland, the urban areas in the Bay Area, they all pretty much knew what it was, and so that made it a little bit easier to get going as well.
Can we generalize military spouses to a degree? Talk about their education, their maturity, those types of things. I mean, I think it's a fairly qualified pool of candidates. Is that a good way
It,
of describing it?
yes, it varies because you get some who are fresh out of high school marrying their high school sweetheart, or fresh out of college marrying their high school or college sweetheart, and so then they never really get their career going. And others where we have people with master's degrees when they met their spouse and then ended up not being able to advance in their career because of it, and so it kind of runs the whole gamut. I will say though, the one thing I've seen that pretty much every seasoned military spouse, if you will, is good at is research. And that's a lot of what a lot of small business owners need. Just the simple, not simple, but the online research. We're not talking about like scientific type research, right? But like the online research, because every time you move, that's what you're doing. You're researching where to live, where the schools are, what the jobs are. That's what you do. And that's the type of research small business owners need. And so that seems to be a really good fit, regardless of education level or work experience, because you go through one PCS and you know how to research like there's no tomorrow. And so
Mm. As a small business owner, you know, what things would I expect to hand off to somebody working, through Freedom Makers?
I always say you got to start with what you're comfortable letting go of. I think for business owners, that tends to, um, if they've never worked with a virtual assistant before, that's what they have to figure out is what are they comfortable letting go of, because this is their baby. They usually, especially if they're a solo business owner, they wear all the hats, right? Their marketing, their sales, their operations, customer service, IT, finance, they do everything. So what are the pieces that they're comfortable letting go of? And then from there, how do they build it out so that those tasks are repeatable, and without input from the business owner, frequent input from the business owner.
Hmm.
And so like an example is processing payroll or payments to our freedom makers was what I was not comfortable letting go of. It was one of the last things I let go of as the owner of the company, right? Whereas a lot of business owners, the first thing they let go of is payroll. And for me, I wasn't comfortable with it. So you always start with what you're comfortable with, or the biggest pebble in your shoe is another example. Like what are you always putting off and you're comfortable letting go of? And then that's where we usually advise business owners to start. Oftentimes it's social media. Um, Another popular one is client follow-up. So scheduling appointments, getting the documents they need from the clients, sending welcome packets or uh, contracts, things like that to the clients, that type of thing. And then of course, with that, I would say the third most popular thing is the data management. So managing the CRM, the calendar, the email, all that stuff for continuing the pipeline of the clients and serving the clients. And so,
How are you screening these candidates? You sort of have a scoring mechanism, don't you? And as to the various candidates that you have in your stable.
yes, so that's one of our things that, well, I'll take a step back and say one of our guiding principles is strive for excellence. So we're constantly trying to improve. We have this belief that you can never achieve excellence, because once you do, that's now your standard. And so it's a moving goalpost, and you can only ever just continue to strive for it. And so we're constantly trying to improve. And one of our big areas of focus right now is making our screening process better. But right now they fill out a questionnaire, we screen that, then we chat with them and we screen that. And then once they're in, we make sure that they're performing. So we do regularly ask clients for feedback, and we ask them for feedback based on our core values, which is that we deliver freedom through professionalism, which is reliability, accuracy, availability, communication, and decision making. And so clients, if they choose, they'll rate their freedom makers based on those core values, and we share that with them so that they know they're doing a good job or what they need to improve upon. And if we find that there's sort of repeat performance issues, then we don't give them new opportunities, and we ask them to leave our community. So we try to hold that standard, and we're constantly trying to improve what that standard is.
So let's take a step back from the business itself and let's talk about the entrepreneurial journey. You're a three-time entrepreneur, right? So the first two didn't, you sort of alluded they didn't work out. So you learned a ton. What are some of the lessons you learned, in this entrepreneurial journey? Somebody that's thinking about starting their own business, might want to learn from the person who's been there.
Um, well, one, I will say from my first business, that didn't take because I was pretty lazy. But
Okay.
also, it was during the economic downturn. It was 2008. It was a little bit ahead of time. It was e-commerce, and that hadn't really taken off yet. And it was in the multilingual space, which I think, in America is just not a big market for. And
Hmm.
so, but also like I created a website and I took a nap basically, right? And so, um, but what I learned is that there's no such thing as failure unless you didn't learn from it, right? And so even though that business didn't succeed, I learned from it, and therefore I don't necessarily consider it a failure. Um, the second one, what I realized, everyone says starting a business is hard, which it is. But the second one was hard because it just wasn't a fit for me. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like it. And it was, and because of that, it was hard to motivate myself, you know, and I kept saying, oh, well, when I'm bigger, I'll hire people, but I never got bigger because I hated it. So I just never really, you know, committed to it type thing. And so that's when we started Freedom Makers, I realized it's hard because there's just so much to do. And how do you prioritize, and what do you know, the limited resources you have, where do you put those? And then that, when you take a step back, is kind of fun. But when you're in the middle of it, it's a bit stressful, right? And so I think when I made that switch, I was like, wow, this is such a better fit. And even when it was hard, it was fulfilling. And my second business wasn't fulfilling. And so that was a lesson learned for me. If it's not,
These are two great life lessons. The first one I can summarize is I mean, it takes some work. You got to keep moving forward, right? You can't just put up a website and people come rushing in to buy your product.
right,
Uh, the
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 importance of sales, right?
Yeah, the second lesson, and I discovered this a long time ago too, because I was in a job that I hated. It's almost impossible to be very good at something that you don't like to do.
Yes, yes, spot on. Yes,
So you played a sport at the Air Force Academy.
I
You going to
did.
admit what it was?
It was rugby, loud
And
and proud.
did you like it or did you
I
love
loved,
it?
I loved it. Yeah.
I think sports is a great analogy for finding if I was a good football player and a good golfer. I love both of those games. A child with an hour's worth of lessons can beat me at tennis because I just don't like it, and I'll never be good at it. And so
Mhm.
I think you need to your lesson about the second business is, you better like what you're doing because you're going to be doing a lot of it, right?
Right. Exactly.
All right. So now we get into this current economy. I'm curious if the COVID environment had a significant impact on freedom makers. I'm guessing that it might even be a sea change that came along with it because everybody's remote, right?
Mhm.
Can we talk about what's going on generally with the remote economy?
Sure. Well, and I'll add, it's funny you use the word sea change, because an analogy that I often use with business is that small business is like a speedboat. And so it can change direction very fast, but it's also more susceptible to the weather and the waves and things like that. Whereas big business is like an aircraft carrier. It takes forever to change direction, but it's more stable. And I've been kind of joking with my team lately that we're now a yacht. And
Hmm.
so we can still change direction fairly quickly. It does take some more time, but we also have a bathroom and a galley and a bedroom that we have to take care of that we didn't have on the speedboat, you know? And so there's other things that we have to take care of now that we didn't have to before. And so it's helping us navigate the challenges that come with growth, which we've certainly experienced during COVID. And um, yeah, and so I think that we're caught up in that sea change for sure.
Laura, one of the difficulties of growing a business as an entrepreneur is that the person who started the company, that's you, who ran everything out of a checkbook, you know,
Mhm.
you reach a certain point and you're going to have to delegate. You're going to have to let go of some things. You're going to have to grow the business, and you run up against these glass ceilings that you couldn't anticipate, and it's hard. Are you going through some of that yourself?
Yes. So I will say, we've been in business. We just celebrated our sixth birthday, but we really didn't start growing until I started hiring. Because going back to if I don't like doing it, I just don't do it. That's something I've learned about myself. And And so there were parts of the business, onboarding new clients, that I'm just not good at. That all the coordinating for scheduling calls, I just am not good at that. And so, that was one of my first hires, is to have someone do all that scheduling, because I just wasn't doing it. And therefore we were losing clients because of it. And so once I started hiring people, we started growing, and ironically, right? And um, one of the things I focused a lot on was making sure everyone had what I call their lanes of responsibility. So the lanes might be gray where the lines are, but at least we generally know, okay, this is your rough lane of responsibility, and this one is yours, and that one is yours, that kind of thing. Um, and then just yesterday, in fact, one of my employees brought up that she felt we needed to hire another person because we were pretty slammed. And I said, okay, I'm on board with that. However, let's write out all the tasks we want this person to take on, because let's walk our talk, right? This is exactly what we say to our clients. We know that now the internal team is at that point where they need to start delegating. So let's write out, what are we going to delegate, and so that's where we're at right now. I've always tend to look toward the future where, um, okay, I have 3 employees. At some point, they're going to have direct reports. So how do we build it up to get ready for that? And so we've been kind of preparing for that this whole time. But at the same time, I didn't expect it to happen this fast. And so, we're sort of navigating all that now.
And now a word about a Veteran Crowd Spotlight sponsor. Cardomax is owned and operated by former Navy SEAL Sean Matson. Cardomax has designed just the right supplements for you and is offering Veteran Crowd an exclusive offer. Buy one, get one free on your first order. Go to cardomax.com and use promo code VeteranCrowd. That's cardomax.com, helping you achieve your max. Now back to your host, Bob Loudon.
So we're talking with Laura Renner, the president and founder of Freedom Makers. Laura, I now want to shift gears on you again.
Sure.
And I want to talk about your military experience and how you think that has helped you be a successful entrepreneur.
Okay. Well, I think, one of the first lessons I learned was that you can always do more than you think you can. And I don't mean as far as the amount of stuff, but rather how far you can go. And, for me, I learned that in basic. I remember like doing a rope climb, and I got way higher than I thought I could. Or when we jumped off the 10 meter and I got underwater way farther than I thought I could. Right. And I realized that it's usually our limitation is ourselves, that we set on ourselves. And yeah, both of those examples were on the physical side, but they apply on the mental side too. And when you think you can't do something, then you can't. But when you think you can, then you can, right? And especially in the military, where I think a huge difference with the military and the commercial world is that the military will hire anybody and train you. Even when I crossed from public affairs to personnel, like the commander in we call it force support, the commander in the force support squadron didn't care that I had no experience. I mean, he knew about my commercial experience, but he didn't care that I was, had no Air Force experience in personnel, and he hired me for my potential. Whereas the commercial side, they don't really do that. They want to see that you have experience before they'll hire you. And so I think that's something that I certainly appreciate about the military. And the lesson that I've learned from that is that I can do anything I want because I know I can learn how to do it, because the Air Force proved to me that they can teach me to do what they need me to do. And so I think those are the two biggest lessons that I apply in business is you don't have to have that industry experience, and you can do more than you think you can.
I want to throw two other topics at you. I've often say that, that there's a lot of things that I can teach you if you come to work for me. I can teach you investment banking.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I can teach you the grit and the resilience. And I also don't think that I can give you a foundation in ethics and personal accountability. I think you get a lot of that from the military. Do you have any thoughts on ethics and personal accountability, and how the military sort of hardwires us for that?
Yeah, I'm sitting here a little stumped because I just realized I'm not sure I have that much experience with straight civilian employees. Like I feel even when I
Ah,
had my corporate job, there were a lot of veterans in that company, and that so it had a
it's
certain
good raw material to build upon, right?
right. And so uh but we certainly see it in the news and things like that when it comes to personal ethics and accountability. That's what leads to crises at companies where somehow was pervaded through the whole company that it now is making national news, right? Um, and but yeah, I think I maybe I'm biased because being an officer, like I just focus so much on leadership. And so I'm like, when you are holding your people accountable, when you're having high expectations of them, and the environment, which is the military, where that's taught and expected, I think is what leads to that, the military having those ethics, right, and that
Hmm.
accountability. And that said, I will say though, once I was talking with a coach, a business coach, and I had been talking with a salesperson for a temp agency, and he was saying that his issue is the number of no call, no shows to a project. Like a warehouse would call and say, I need 3 people on Monday. And he would send 6 because he knew 3 would not show up. And I was like, wow, I don't have that problem. I mean, we have our problems, right? But I don't have that problem. And I was like, maybe it's because we only work with military spouses and they have that higher level of accountability than a straight civilian, if you will. And I mentioned that to my coach, and she's like, oh, don't you do that. Don't you compare yourself to others. You can only compare yourself to yourself and improve yourself, right? Like just because you think you're better than them doesn't mean you're good. And I just, that blew me away. And so from there, that's what that actually that was the foundation for our strive for excellence guiding principle. Like we can
Hmm.
only improve ourselves. And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but
Well, no, I just do believe that the people that are around the military, it just gets baked into them, and I do think veterans make good raw material for employees. They've already proven that they're team players, and they've already proven that they were coachable, right?
right,
And or they wouldn't have made it in the
right.
military, right?
And they've proven that they'll figure out how to get the job done.
Yeah, they got, and then you take the spouses. I mean, you want to talk about people that have some grit and resiliency, right?
Right.
Uh, there's a group right there that certainly figures that out.
And I'll add to that as a plug, a shameless plug for spouses. They don't go through basic training to be taught that, right?
Hmm.
There's no, I mean, there might be like a seminar when they get married or arrive at a new base about how to integrate into the military community. But really, it's more learning by doing. There's not really like a guide like there is for the service members. You get inundated with what's expected from you from day one of boot camp, right? There's no such thing for spouses. They have to learn the hard way just by figuring it out on their own. And so, yeah, I think there's certainly that plug for their resiliency in that they have to figure it out on their own.
And just one more thought, and I'm kind of backtracking, but I wanted to be sure that we got this out. With the COVID environment and so many people working remotely, there's going to be a lot of people that aren't going back to offices in the future. Um, did you see an uptick in demand that coincided with COVID once people kind of, hey, this Zooming and remote working thing actually works? Maybe I don't need to have a person, with a parking space and in an office, and I don't have to recruit somebody who lives within 20 miles of me. I can recruit somebody from San Francisco to work in Virginia, as just like we're talking right now, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what we saw. I think once the initial shock wore off, because you remember those first 2 weeks, everyone was like, what is happening? Right. And then
Right.
once that wore off, people are like, okay, I got to figure out how to make this work. And then we've basically been running ever since. Like we had a client who her co-working space shut down, and that
Mhm.
co-working space included a receptionist. So when that shut down, she hired us. She hired like a second freedom maker to take on sort of the secretarial duties that receptionist handled. And I think she's now on to like her third or fourth. She's built a whole team of freedom makers. And so,
How about that?
yeah, so we've seen that definitely as people have figured out, hey, exactly what you said. I don't need to hire someone who needs to come in the office. I don't need to hire someone who needs to be even in the same time zone as me.
Mhm.
And what's interesting, I've noticed, is that we've always had spouses that were overseas. And I can say OCONUS, right? We're a veteran
Mhm.
podcast, but and they've had a hard time, I think, getting picked up by clients because of the time zone difference, right? We're not seeing that anymore. The clients are like, yeah, whenever you need to do it, you do it, and we'll work it out. Sometimes if they need to have phone calls during the business day, they just make sure that time can overlap. But we're finding that even our overseas freedom makers are not having struggles like they used to with getting picked up with CONUS clients because
What does the
people.
next 12 months hold for freedom makers? What's on the docket?
Oh my goodness. So we are really focusing on ramping up, we call it the Freedom Maker acquisition strategy, and sort of developing an ambassador program with military bases and getting more active recruiting. We finally reached that point where we need to make sure we have enough spouses for our clients. In the past, we always had more spouses than we had clients, but now we're reaching that tipping point. So it's a new adventure or new part of the journey for us is figuring out, okay, how are we going to build our active recruiting um, structure, if you will,
Mhm.
going forward. So that's a big thing for us. I will say one thing about, it sort of just the timing worked out where I had been trying to find like a easy billing, time tracking and billing system, and I couldn't find one that matched us. Because I will say that going back to one of your previous questions, the lesson I've learned from freedom makers is that I do things differently. And for a long time, I wondered if that meant I was wrong because everyone else in business was doing it a different way than me. And we finally proved that my way works. And so then, but part of that issue is that we have a hard time finding software solutions off the shelf that meet our needs because we do things differently than most businesses. So I hired a couple students. One was a freedom maker. They built out this in-house time tracking and billing system that blew us away, and it really helped us scale the business. But also now we're like already to where we need the next level. And of course, those two students went and got full-time jobs. So we had to hire like a development company. And so that's the other thing we're working on in the next 12 months is rolling out this time tracking system. And so you've seen it, right? You've seen our new system, and we have an even better one coming out here shortly. So
Very good.
yeah.
How do people get in touch with freedom makers?
So the easiest way is honestly through our website, freedom-makers.com. There's a contact us page where they can schedule a call with anyone on the team. And there's also a task audit on that contact us page, because if business owners are wondering what to delegate, they can take that task audit for ideas on what they're comfortable and ready to let go of. And then for spouses, there's a join us tab. And that part of what our journey, right? We're updating the videos that they can view to figure out if they're a fit for us and if they want to apply. And so those should be posted. The older videos are there now. The newer ones should be posted here shortly. So the
Good.
best place, honestly, for anyone is our website.
So we'll put links to all of the ways to get in touch with freedom makers on the show notes. Laura Renner, thank you for stepping into the spotlight. I really do appreciate you sharing your journey with us. Thanks so much for telling us about that and about freedom makers.
I appreciate that. Thanks for the time. It's been fun.
You've been listening to the Spotlight on the VeteranCrowd Network. We're bringing military veterans and spouses who are making a difference in our community to you every week. Big shout out and a bravo Zulu to Laura Renner of Freedom Makers, and that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Spotlight by VeteranCrowd. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and uploads, please visit our website at VeteranCrowdNetwork.com. We'll see you next time.